So my name is Ingo Roshinsky. I came at the very end of 2001 to join the faculty here in the Department of Biostatistics. And when I came, I learned pretty quickly that it's a good idea to have sort of an antenna out when certain people have to tell you something about your field or about the department or the way around school, that it's a good idea to pay attention to them. And conveniently, Chuck's office was always very close by to mine. So we had many sort of conversations in the hallway. And as Alan has already described, like any conversation you have with Chuck only contains a certain portion that could be described academic in nature. Being from the old world, lots of our conversations revolves around Volkswagen Beetles picked up at factories, adult beverages, yes, a shocker. And it was the very end of my first year. I don't know if Chuck remembers that, when he intercepted me in the hallway and he looked sort of very serious, and he said, "Ingo, I need to give you some advice." And I thought, oh, here comes the first official hosing down in my academic career as a faculty member. And Chuck's advice was, buy 2002 Burgundies now, lots thereof. I did not, and to the day I'm kicking myself that I didn't. Yeah. So I'm not making this up. So every time I go to, so people know about my affinity for beer, I think. Not denying anything here. But I also like good wine, and Chuck's advice has always been great in that regard. So to the day, like the 2002 is doing beautifully right now. So if I go to a wine shop, if you drink Burgundy wine, this is not a cheap sport, I should say. So and the 2002 are just about the best value for the quality. So I kicking myself almost every day for not following Chuck's advice and buying lots thereof. But I would like to give a shout out to Chuck, because there are really not that many departments, or any departments I know of, where if you're a tenure track faculty member and you get promoted, some kind soul opens his wine cellar and gives you a really nice bottle of wine. And I think that's another distinction of our department, and I'm very grateful for this. And this is another conversation I had with Chuck that he may or may not remember, that when I got promoted from assistant to associate professor, he came by my office and he said many, many nice things. And then he asked me, I would like to give you a really nice bottle of wine. What would you like? And so I took all courage together. I said, a 1982 Bordeaux. And Chuck said, no. I got still a very nice bottle of wine, but it was not a 1982 Bordeaux. So when Mei Cheng asked me if I would be chairing a session here for the celebration for Chuck, I said, of course, I'd be happy to do this. And then I got the schedule, and I thought, when I looked at all the names that in my session, and then of course you do your prep work and you pull the CVs of all the people, and then you sort of feel really out of place when you look at all these accomplishments. So I decided I'm not going to rattle down all the accomplishments of our speakers. I'm just going to introduce them, because that would just take more time than we have in the session if I listed all of the accomplishments alone. So I'll just go ahead and introduce the speakers. And the first one, actually, one more thing. So Chuck already commented about this morning, and every once in a while I'm humbled and awestruck, and I show up in like a shirt and slacks instead of shorts and a t-shirt. So I just wanted to use this sort of to express my gratitude and my I'm really humbled, and I'm appreciative of that I'm allowed to chair a session here. So our first speaker is Paul Albert, who is the Chief of Biostatistics and Bioinformatics at the National Institute of Child Health and Development. And he's an alumnus PhD 1988 I have on my record. So Paul, please take it away.
Squeeze through here, and let me not spill the coffee. Well, I'm going to put it down here. I never, just like when I was a student, I never go anywhere without coffee. So following Larry's discussion about experimental design, it got me thinking. And I don't know if many of you who took Chuck's experimental design, he used to have notes, and the notes would be these mimeograph or copies, and it would be like, at the end of the semester, 1,000 pages, it seemed. and it was on the split plot and all this stuff, which actually, nowadays I know a lot of students don't get exposed to that, and actually in sometimes it's been really helpful. But you know what the most useful thing has been about those notes? When my son was 2 years old, it was a fantastic booster seat for him. So thank you. Thank you for that. So I'm going to talk about basically, I'm going to talk about Hopkins biostatistics under Chuck, and sort of and what impact it has had on my career, and how sort of over the years, and particularly most recently, I draw a lot from that, and really appreciate all that I experienced here. The two components I'll talk about is both scholarship and leadership. So I came in 1981, probably the first, just after maybe his first year. It was the end of it. Well, no, it was 82. So and I got to experience the new energy of all these new fantastic faculty members who, and to see and to watch and to sort of just watch them develop as from students to the senior and fantastic people that they are today. And that was a very great learning experience. And what I learned is collaboration. I remember having the opportunity to work with both Scott and Kung Yi when they were doing their initial GE work, and learning so much from just seeing the dynamics of them talking and me just saying nothing. To this day, I absorb. So it's really been very a highlight of my education. So I'm going to talk a little bit about scholarship, and then I'm going to talk about leadership. And it's only been in the last 6 years that I've ever thought too much about leadership, as I've taken over one of the branches at NICHD, and I've realized just recently, as I'm doing this talk, how much I've learned from Chuck about leadership. And I'm going to give some examples. And then at the end, I want to just tell a couple of stories that he won't remember. And I was a lowly student coming in, kind of a high anxiety New York kid, and there were three or four small incidents that kind of tell you what kind of person and leader and what kind of person he is, in that, who's more vulnerable than a first-year, second-year student, and how he treated me. So I want to tell those stories. Hopefully I'll have time to do that. So just about me, I finished in 88, although I like how my thing says 89. I feel younger, so I'm going to change that to 89 from now on. And I've been in 4 institutes at the NIH over my career. I actually take pride in that, because everyone has to be famous for something. I kind of feel that. And no other statistician at NIH has been at 4 institutes. So I take very much pride in that. And instability counts for something, I think. So I started in the Neurology Institute, just coming from here. In those days, we didn't do postdocs. It was kind of a position there. And then I worked in relatively small trials and studies, and then moved to NHLBI, where we did very large studies, big cooperative group trials, and learned from the best people in doing that. Moved over to NCI about 7 years later, where we did lots of cancer research, more in terms of the basic science and smaller trials. And then the last position, and I hope to be my last, because I will not do 5. I won't do 5. Is at NICHD, where I'm working on child health and leading a group of statisticians, which as I realize now, is a lot hard. Leading looks easy, but it's a lot harder than it looks. So at NICHD, some of my work was on seizures, like looking at whether seizures were random or not, and coming up with new methods for characterizing relapsing remitting diseases. And then doing some work in generalized estimating equations related to spatial data. But I have to say, NINDS at the time was a very supportive environment, but there was no one there doing methodological research. So a lot of my time, I would sit there after experiencing what I experienced at Hopkins, and I'd say to myself, probably the first, surely all the time at NINDS, I'd say, I'd be faced with a new problem, and I'd say, well, how would Scott Ziegler address this? How would, and I would basically do it, and I would think basically about the question, how would Kung-Yi Liang deal with this? And I would sort of imagine that, and then I would try to answer the question. So thank you, and I will amend the papers for appropriate co-authorship later. So moving over to NHLBI, where we looked on large studies, I became very interested in missing data. And it was a time when missing data was very popular and very as a research topic, and we had a lot of it in some of the trials. Actually, some of the trials were the ones that we didn't have much missing were the trials that were done at Hopkins at the time. I think there were a couple, like the camp study of Jim's here, that had no missingness. But some of the other studies had a lot of it, and so one of my big research areas was to develop methodology in that area while at NHLBI. And then moving over to NCI, it was an exciting time to move. It was in 2000 where all sort of this targeted therapy stuff was starting at the NCI. So we got to work on some very interesting problems in models without a gold standard, because everyone wants to estimate diagnostic accuracy without a gold standard. And what are the problems in doing that? And it became something that was very intriguing that a group of us worked on. And then moving over to the NICHD to lead that group has been fantastic, because I think the problems are so important. As Chuck said yesterday, when he said public health is about his grandchildren or people like him, I actually feel very strongly about that. And NICHD's mission is that. So we've been working on issues of fetal growth. We have a large fetal growth study trying to predict from ultrasound and maternal characteristics bad subsequent outcomes in early childhood, in neonatal morbidity, and then also how do teenagers drive? Can we predict or can we monitor teenagers to see if they're at a high risk of crashing? And then also things like labor progression, obstetrics. Can we sort of monitor a woman when they're having repeated dilation checks to see whether or not they're going to deliver very quickly? Can we monitor these? Can we develop prediction to do that? I'm just showing some data, because it's always fun to show data. Looking at cervical dilation, and one of the questions in these kind of studies where you basically have repeated cervical dilation once a person enters the hospital, and you want to sort of understand their natural history or their progression, is what's time zero? And so one of the problems we were faced with was, how do you do this? Well, obstetricians have always, for years, since the 1950s, have sort of, they're smart people, and they said, well, let's go backwards in time, because we know at full dilation at 10 centimeters, close to the time you are going to deliver, we know that we anchor those curves, and we can look backwards in times. But our interest was really on looking forward in time. And you can see, if you look forward in time, if you want to predict, you see that people coming into the hospital, if you look at the time here is time from enter the hospital at all different times. So some of the methodological development that we've been recently doing has been trying to sort of align the curves so that they all have sort of a common anchoring point. And we've been doing that by choosing one point, let's say the clinically relevant point is, say, 2 centimeters, and then aligning all the curves so that that you can make inference from 2 centimeters. And so we've been recently working on that and have some work on that. So what did I learn at Hopkins? So that's sort of in my path, and I'm really repeating a lot of some of the things that people said in the first session. Really, what the important thing in our profession I learned here, what's the important question? Not just the technical aspects. Although I felt my technical training was fantastic, it really is, what's the scientific question? Be curious, always asking questions. The scientific problem is first, and the technical problem is second. Although the technical issues are very important. No toy problems. I never remember anyone working on a toy problem here. It's all relevant. It's all important. And I think that's what sort of makes Hopkins Biostatistics, particularly starting, and I only came starting in the Rohde years, but it surely was rampant there. It was always, why is this an important question? And I know this continues to this day. And then pick really good collaborators. I saw people collaborating within a department, within this department. I saw how people mingled with each other you'd find one team with Ron Brookmeyer and Scott Ziegler working together, and then another with Kung Yi and Scott, another with Hendricks and Scott, or Kung Yi and Hendricks, so all kinds of mixtures of people. And that is, I've learned that's very important. So work in teams, expose yourself to a wide range of science, problems, and people, and be a biostatistical investigator, not a technician. We have a lot of postdocs, and they come from other schools, and they come out and they're really focused on the technical aspects, and I have to push them to be a biostatistical investigator. Ask questions. The technical stuff's important, but not the most important. So in terms of leadership and my own experience, I started leading the NICHD in 2009, and the group's expanded to 6 investigators, a staff scientist. We have about an equal number of postdocs, and we have a post-bac program as well. And I try to refocus the mission from a more mathematical one to really try to do what happened here at Hopkins, is try to develop that kind of culture. And I realize that is not easy. It looks easy when it's done beautifully, as it was done by Chuck, but is not easy. And what did I learn? And I just realized I learned this from Chuck. So as I was thinking of this talk, I said, hey, I learned that from him. Hey, I learned that from him. But what I learned is hire junior faculty like Chuck did. And I don't know how you were able to do it, but it's not that easy to do, because you're often presented with 100 CVs and they all look identical, and then you pick wrong. but give those junior faculty the resources for success and let them flourish. Don't micromanage. And that's kind of hard if you're sort of a control freak by nature. But let them. If you hire good people, let them go. Let them develop. Let them develop their own identity. Make the focus on others, not yourself, which is hard if you tend to be narcissistic. Put them first. It doesn't have to always be your show. It doesn't have to be your show. A group's culture starts with and ends with its leader, and I think we, as a leader, as a head of a group, I have to always remember that. It's really, if there's a problem in the culture, it's generally the leader's fault, and you don't get the credit if it's good, but if it's a problem, it is generally the leader's fault. Have a sense of humor and look past people's foibles. Get entertainment out of people's. And know what's important and what's not. And now I'm just going to present 3 little stories that Chuck won't remember. I mean, but they meant something. They meant something to me. So, my first day at Hopkins. So, I just started my first day, and I was kind of, for no reason I can understand now, I was sort of cocky a little, and I got this. And we were going to take classes. In those days, we took the probability class, the first probability class, statistics sequence, we took at Hopkins. And the second one, at Biostat. And the second year, we took a more advanced course at Homewood, if you came right from an undergraduate degree. Well, I marched into Chuck's office the first day, and I said, I don't want to take the first sequence, because I already had that as an undergraduate. I don't need to take that. And he said, well, generally our students want it. Generally our students should take it. It's a good thing to do. I really want it. So he smiled. It was a little smirk he made. He didn't say anything. He smiled, and he said, okay, fine. If you want to do it, we'll do it. I go the first day at Hopkins. They start talking about measure theory, this, that. I went back the next day, and I said to Chuck, I want to go back. And he could have made a big deal about it. He could have said, why are you causing me this grief, this trouble? But all he did was smiled a little bit, like a little smirk, and he said, okay, get the notes. No talk. No, I would have probably teased the person forever, but he didn't. So I appreciate it. The second story is I really do know French. And what that is we had, I don't know if you guys do it now, but we had a foreign language requirement at that time. and you had to know French, German, or Russian or something, of which I knew none. You know, being from New York, if you know English, you're doing pretty well. You know, so I just so I didn't know. And I was nervous about this requirement. I was very nervous about it, and I must have marched into Chuck's office 4 times during that year, a couple of years, saying, "What about the exam? I don't know French. I don't know German. I don't." And I was worried about it. And he said, "Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry." So finally, I go in, and he says, "Okay, um, this is the exam. Here's a book." And there's a chapter in it. Translate that book, then, and come back and translate it. So I said, okay, fine, I'm going to do that. I'm going to translate it. So, what's my time? What time do I have to get back? Don't worry, 6 months is fine. So I said, fine. So I come back. So I'm in the library, and I'm always in the library looking through books, just looking through books. And I come across the English translation of this book. Right? So I'm thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? Now, being an honest and relatively naive person at the time, now I would have no problem with using the book. But at that time, I felt very guilty. I couldn't sleep. I was, oh, what am I going to do? So I walked in his office and I said, I found the book. You know, and all he did was smile in that same way, just like a little smile. And he said, okay, well, let's pick another article. Pick any article you want in anywhere and translate it. So I said, fine. Went to Biometrics. I found an article which looked like someone translated from French, from English to French. So it was so easy to translate back. I translated it back. I gave the thing to Chuck. He comes back in 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes. Said, you passed. So, and the lesson, and which I don't know if he ever even looked at it, to be honest with you, but the lesson of it is, I've never used French. I had a liberal arts education. I think it's important to know languages. But for statistical research, I don't think you really need to know French. And I think he agreed with that. And it's a rule, and he felt like he had to, respect that rule, but he knew when to bend the rules. And that's something I've learned as a leader, and I do really respect. The next issue is the dreaded oral exam. I don't know if you had oral exam. The new people have oral exams, but we used to have these oral exams where you would come in after your second or third year, I don't even remember, and I think it was the second, and everyone would sit around and they would ask questions. It could be on anything. It wasn't on a thesis topic or anything. And well, I had this horrible exam where I think it was Chuck who asked me. Was Richard Royal who asked me what are the most important mathematical developments of the 17th century, and it went down from there. It went down from there. So I think by the end they asked me what my name was, and I didn't know. So it was and Chuck basically, everyone agreed I should come back in 3 months to whatever, take the exam over again, fine. And what Chuck did, and he didn't tell me anything because I was kind of concerned. What am I going to do? I won't have any funding. I don't know what the funding situation is because my funding ended, and there was this cheaper tuition. I don't even know what they called it at a certain time, and I wasn't able because I had to pass the exams. He went ahead and increased my funding, paid for another year or 6 months where I got a stipend, so I made money by doing poorly on the exam. Thanks. But never even told me about it. Never told me about it, just did it. And that I do want to thank you for that. I really admit. So these are 3 stories that kind of show you his character, and show you what he's like to people who are vulnerable, and that says something about a person. So I again want to thank you for that. And then a toast to Chuck Rohde's next 50 years at Hopkins Biostatistics.